In the reading from Genesis, which we just heard, we have a story we're all familiar with, the 7 days of creation. On the seventh day, God rests. As Anna says in the extract we just heard, it isn't just that God flakes out after working reasonably hard for 7 days. Making the world as God did and making it well transformed order and disorder into life and plenty. In the story, God makes the world and chaos recedes. Things are good. Then God takes a day off and demonstrates for the first time that rest is possible. God is all-powerful and clearly experiences time differently to us. So what does it mean to say that God takes the day off? Probably not that God lies on the sofa for 24 hours watching Netflix with a tub of ice cream. God doesn't have to recharge in the way that we do, in the way that creative beings do. God is and has been and is becoming all at the same time eternally. God is not just hurried along in one direction by the waves of the fourth dimension time in the same way that we are. So the command behind this passage, the command that like God, all people should take a Sabbath and rest, is not just God's schedule for a good work-life balance. It's one of the most radical, fleshed out and repeated commandments in the Bible. It even made it into the top 10. A requirement that people turn off, reflect and take time away from labour and purpose to simply be and exist and remember that they are free, dignified, valuable people worthy of a life that they can relax and enjoy. People worthy of freedom, who are all equally created in the image of a creator, who intended that people weren't just free in the sense that they could choose to spend their lives striving and enslaved in economic systems that reduce human beings to productive units, ripping them of all the dignity of being rational beings who are valuably created in the image of God. Time is and always has been the ultimate form of human wealth on this earth. Without time, all other forms of wealth are meaningless. It's this insight about time, patently obvious but frequently forgotten, that makes keeping a Sabbath day both spiritually profound and politically radical. To reclaim time is to be rich. To reclaim a full day every week is to be among the 1%. Sabbath practice is also one of the most unambiguously articulated commandments in the Hebrew Bible. It even makes it into Moses' list. And yet, very few people of the book actually keep a Sabbath. Only a few traditionally observant Jews, Seventh-day Adventists. Perhaps keeping this particular commandment is just too hard for the rest of us. So, Karl Marx, while he certainly did not intend to write a spiritual text when he wrote Das Kapital in 1867, he ended up producing a work that has survived into the new millennium precisely because it speaks such deep spiritual truths about the meaning of human life. Even as many of the facts in the book are debunked, the work has survived. Marx wails a prophetic lament on behalf of his society. He holds up a mirror, showing how human time, human life is broken down, appropriated and devoured by the boundless thirst of capitalism. Marx describes the despotic bell of the workplace that wrenches people, reduced to mere personifications of labour time from their homes. In capitalism, free time is a waste or, at best, a necessary evil to prepare us to be more productive again. Marx describes how technology, rather than freeing us from labour, creates an increasingly frenetic pace of work. The need to milk more and more value from a human hour in order to, in Marx's works, close the pores of time. Certainly, we recognise this phenomenon today, that somehow in our high-tech world where there should be more time, we are all feverishly, dizzyingly busy, perhaps exactly as Marx described. Any surplus time created by labour-saving technology is immediately sucked back into the system to create more value, more money, more goods, more innovation. we, the people, never actually receive the surplus time as time. Indeed, even today, although the labour movement has brought us the weekend, we typically spend our weekends in a huge flurry of acquisition, preparation, consumption, and productivity. Stopping is not an option. This is almost as true for the wealthy as for anyone, because while the wealthy could technically choose to stop working or to work less, they generally don't. There's always a mortgage, or even a few, to pay, and status to maintain, things to buy, and perhaps, most important, a general lack of anything better to do. Once we've been dehumanized long enough by the insatiable engine of secular acquisition and achievement, it's very hard to go back. Even right now, when we all have more time than we ever have, how do we spend it? Now, Marx probably wouldn't argue, as I'm going to, that the solution to the degradation of people into mere personifications of labour time is to observe a religious Sabbath. After all, Marx famously dismissed religion as the opiate of the masses. However, I'd argue the taste of freedom, the knowledge that there is a day a week where you're not just an object your boss can control and order around, doesn't just produce a sense of respite and reconciliation and becoming more able to face the working week. It doesn't just give you some time out. The radical freedom of not just being a mindless economic subject reminds us of the true human state, which is one of radical freedom. Taking just one day out of back-breaking systems gives us, and all oppressed peoples, the potential to reflect and compare the state of freedom with the unjust normality. It gives people a sense of the freedom that all are equally entitled to in the kingdom of God. So let's put the Sabbath into some context. Sabbath emerges as a practice at the same time as the economic equivalent of the Sabbath does, which is the Jubilee. Both kind of follow the Exodus narrative and are articulated as laws for the Hebrew people in the Bible as the Jews are in the wilderness, and they're living through this memory of having been slaves in the land of Egypt and working out how a good society works. These rules, the Sabbath and the Jubilee, make sure that everyone, regardless of situation or status, has the experience of freedom for a whole day a week where they're not subjugated in a self-sustaining economic system of exploitation. Equally, the Jubilee, which insists on the cancellation of all debts every 50 years, prevents people from being born and sold into economic slavery, and it kind of resets the injustice of capitalism, which is a system that ultimately enables the rich to become richer and richer at the expense of the poor. After all resources are always finite, so having too much always means that you're preventing someone else from having enough to live a reasonable life. Wealth always costs someone something. Both the Sabbath and the Jubilee are designed to prevent slavery and ensure that all humans live freely, at least to some extent. So what about today? Well, formally, of course, slavery is illegal, and as many would say, the standard of living has never been so high. And yet, in normal life at least, the Sabbath is under attack from all corners. Smartphones, the internet, social media mean we're all beholden to economic structures, whether they're adverts or impudent calls from the boss at the weekend, which means that we can never take the Sabbath properly. There's always one more call to make, one more email to answer. Under normal situations, and at the moment we aren't living in a normal situation, we also require people in lower paying professions, particularly the hospitality industry, to work at weekends so that we, the rich, can continue to engage in economic pursuits all of the time. We require these poorer people to give up their weekly taste of freedom in a predictable way and be subject to rotas which they can't control. In many ways, the Sabbath, a necessary model of political resistance, can provide an important insight into all acts of oppression. How every single system of oppression is like the endless grind of economic exploitation, which destroys the taste of freedom and the vision of the kingdom of the God, which God has insisted time and again is a necessary part of being human, and has insisted on this ever since the love story between God and humanity began with the creation of the world and God resting on the seventh day. This requirement, that all remember and taste freedom, is a crucial one. So let us safeguard our freedom and rejoice in the freedom that God has shown us, and use this space to rejoice, to protect the freedom of all of us. Now, in many ways, we're living in strange times where there's more time and more space to reflect than there ever has been, where people in lower paid industries are briefly not accountable to the rota, and where the world is gradually shifting. Perhaps this taste of time to be free and taste the freedom that God has given us, given everyone, will give us an opportunity to reimagine what society can be, to reimagine a society where everyone, again, is protected from constant slavery and given enough respite from hateful words that damage assurance, respite from endless work, being constantly beholden to your phone, respite from having to do or buy all the time and be out going to shops all the weekend. Perhaps we can reimagine a world anew, a world which better reflects the kingdom of God and includes that regular reminder, that regular reset. What is it to be the radical free human that we were born to be?